When did you realize silence can be louder than words? I think the first time I truly understood the weight of silence was when I was 17. But to explain it properly, I need to take you back a little further, because silence had always been a presence in my home. It just took me years to recognize how loud it actually was. Growing up, my parents weren't the type to scream at each other. In fact, they rarely fought in front of me at all. To a stranger, our house might have looked peaceful, but I learned quickly that sometimes the most frightening thing isn't raised voices, it's the absence of them. I remember being maybe 8 or 9 years old, sitting at the kitchen table with my homework spread out in front of me. My mom stood at the sink washing dishes, while my dad came home from work. He didn't say hello, he didn't kiss her cheek, he just walked past her, poured himself a drink, and sat in the living room. My mom didn't say anything either. She just kept scrubbing the same plate, her hands moving slower and slower until she finally set it down. The silence between them filled the house like smoke. It made my stomach twist. Even as a kid, I could hear the unspoken words: disappointment, resentment, tiredness. I didn't understand the specifics, but I understood the weight. And in those moments, I always became extra loud, asking silly questions, showing off my drawings, chattering about my day, because I thought maybe if I filled the space with noise, I could drown out the silence. But no matter how much I talked, it sat there, heavy and immovable. Fast forward to my teenage years when the silences started creeping into my own relationships. I had a best friend, someone I thought I'd grow old with. We did everything together, late night walks, endless texting, plans for college. But one day, without explanation, she just stopped talking to me. No fight, no closure. My texts got shorter replies. My calls went unanswered. When I asked what was wrong, she said, "Nothing, I'm just busy." That silence was louder than any insult she could have thrown at me, because words, even cruel ones, give you something to grab onto, something to argue against or defend yourself from. Silence gives you nothing. It forces you to sit in uncertainty, to question everything, to fill in the blanks with your worst fears. But the moment that really carved the lesson into me happened when I was 17 and my grandmother passed away. She had lived with us for years, this tiny but fierce woman who smelled like lavender soap and always slipped me candy when my parents weren't looking. Toward the end, she was sick a lot, spending most of her days in bed. I visited her room every night, sometimes with homework in hand, just to sit by her side. We didn't always talk. Sometimes we just watched TV together or sat in comfortable quiet, but her presence was steady, grounding. The night she died, I wasn't there. I had stayed late at school for a project, and by the time I got home, the house was eerily quiet. No TV murmuring from her room, no clink of her teacup on the bedside table. I walked down the hallway, and when I reached her door, it was half open. My mom sat on the edge of the bed, holding her hand, tears streaming down her face, but she wasn't making a sound. My dad stood in the corner, rigid, his face unreadable. I didn't need anyone to tell me what had happened. The silence was deafening. It screamed louder than any sob could have. It told me she was gone, that the world had shifted permanently, that I would never hear her voice or her laugh again. In the days that followed, people said all the usual things. She's in a better place. She lived a full life. She loved you very much. And yet none of those words landed. What stayed with me was that first moment walking into her room, when the silence wrapped around me and I understood loss in a way I never had before. As I've gotten older, I've realized silence shows up in so many forms. The silence after a fight with someone you love, when both of you are too stubborn or too hurt to break it first. The silence in a hospital waiting room, when everyone's praying for good news but no one dares speak it aloud. The silence of a phone that doesn't ring when you need it to, of an empty inbox when you're waiting for someone to care. But I've also learned that silence isn't always cruel. Sometimes it's the most honest form of love. Sitting next to a grieving friend without trying to fix their pain, holding someone's hand during a panic attack, letting them breathe without forcing words, standing outside at night, under a wide sky, realizing you don't need to say anything because the moment already says it all. Silence can destroy, yes, but it can also protect, comfort, and speak truths words can't touch. Still, when I think about the loudest silence of my life, it always comes back to my grandmother's room that night, the stillness that shouted her absence. That was the moment I understood, deep in my bones, that silence can roar louder than any scream.